Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhagavati Naistike. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsrup Das Goswami, Volume 4, in every town and village around the world, 1968 to 1971. Chapter 30th, London, a dream fulfilled. So Prabhupada's disciples, especially Shamsundar Prabhu, had been working very hard to complete the temple, and he had elaborate designs in his mind. But a day before installation, he collapsed upstairs in exhaustion. Worked so hard, working for a long time. So further, on opening day, many guests, Indians especially, crowded the temple, responding to flyers and advertisements. Apple Records had supplied a professional florist who had decorated the room with floral arrangements. A BBC television crew was on hand to videotape the ceremony, while most of the devotees held kirtan. Prabhupada, behind a curtain at the other end of the temple, bathed Radha and Krishna. The plan was that after the bathing ceremony, the deities would be placed on the altar and Yamuna would dress them. Once they were dressed and enthroned, the curtain would open for all the guests to behold Shri Radha and Krishna. Prabhupada would lecture and then everyone would feast. But because of Shamsundar's oversight, the installation almost became a disaster. Prabhupada had finished bathing the deities and they had been placed on the marble altar when suddenly the elephant leg columns tottered. The canopy above the deities began to collapse. Prabhupada, seeing the danger, jumped onto the altar and seized the heavy columns in a split second. With great strength, he held the two front pillars in place. "Get this out of here," he shouted. While Prabhupada's arms protected the deities, the men removed the canopy and then two men at a time carried each of the pillars away. The deities remained unharmed. So the columns could have collapsed on the deities, or the roof of the canopy could have collapsed on the deities, and it could have broken the deities. The Prabhupada just jumped on the altar and just held the canopies and then held the deities in his, put his arms around the deities. While Prabhupada was behind the curtain rescuing Radha and Krishna, on the other side of the curtain, guests and reporters awaited the unveiling of the deities. Unaware of the mishap, guests saw only men emerging from behind the curtain, carrying large pillars and a canopy. The BBC camera crew began filming the canopy and pillars as they appeared from behind the curtain, taking them to be part of a ceremonial procession. So they didn't know what was happening. They thought this was part of the ceremony. A few devotees behind the curtain with Prabhupada were amazed, but there was no time now for apologies or appreciations. Yamuna dressed the deities, Prabhupada hurrying her. When at last everything was ready, Prabhupada opened the main curtain, revealing the graceful forms of Lord Krishna and Radharani to the temple full of guests. A devotee began to offer arti, while Prabhupada, wearing a saffron chadar and a garland of carnations, stood to one side, reverentially looking upon Radha and Krishna as a worshipper and protector. This was the culmination of months of effort. Actually, years of planning had preceded this auspicious occasion. 100 years before, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had hoped for the day when Krishna consciousness would come to England, and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had also desired it. Now that an authorized temple of Radha and Krishna was preaching Krishna consciousness in London, it was a historic occasion for Gaudiya Vaishnavism. A long-standing order of the previous acharyas had been fulfilled. Prabhupada had sent invitations to several of his god brothers in India. None of them had been able to come, of course, but at least they should have been pleased to learn that this dream of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had been fulfilled. Prabhupada was 73 years old. He had now opened 21 temples in 3 years. Recently, he had told some of his disciples that they should try to form a governing body for ISKCON to relieve him of the management and allow him to concentrate fully on presenting Krishna conscious literature. This literature could be introduced all over the world into homes, schools, and colleges for the benefit of everyone. It would be in such literature that he would live on. How much time he had left in this world, he didn't know. He said, but he wanted to go on serving and trying to please his Guru Maharaj, life after life. Nevertheless, despite Prabhupada's desire to retire from active work and absorb himself in writing books, here he was installing deities in a new temple and protecting them from his disciples' carelessness. Had he not been present, the celebration would have been a disaster. So many hardworking disciples, and they still needed his personal guidance. ISKCON was just beginning to grow. Prabhupada wanted to open not just 21 temples, but at least 108. His world traveling and book printing were just beginning, and like everything else, the number of disciples would increase. The prestige of the movement would increase, and with it, opposition from the atheists. Krishna consciousness was growing, and Prabhupada was in the forefront. All around I see bright, he said, that is the glory of Krishna. He saw himself as a servant of his spiritual master. The bright future was in Krishna's hands. Prabhupada called for Shyam Sundar. Although Prabhupada was angry at first because of the near disaster on the altar, he admitted that his disciples had done their best. The temple was beautiful, he told Shyam Sundar. He liked it. He then asked that a sign be placed out front with gold letters on a blue background, Radha Krishna Temple. This temple was constructed with great labor and effort by Shyam Sundar Das Adhikari. See, instead of chastising him or kicking him out for making such a big mistake, Prabhupada said this sign should be placed in front of the temple with acknowledging the effort and labor of Shyam Sundar Das Adhikari. On the day of Prabhupada's departure from London, he distributed some of his personal effects, such as sweaters and scarves, to his disciples. He then went downstairs alone into the temple to see the deities. He offered fully prostrated obeisances on the floor for a long time, and then stood looking at Radha and Krishna. Yamuna. Prabhupada was looking at the deities with complete devotion. He loved those deities. He had commented about their exquisite beauty and how they complemented each other, how sometimes Radharani looked more beautiful, but now Krishna's moon-like face and eyes were shining. Prabhupada saw me and matter-of-factly said, if you practice what I have taught you and follow the instructions of how I have taught you to worship the deity, and if you read the books that we have printed, it is sufficient for you to go back to Godhead. You need not learn anything new. Simply practice what I have taught you and your life will be perfect. Then he left, just left. Can you believe it? In 1969, this is what happened in 1969. And Prabhupada is only saying, just practice what I have taught you and follow the instructions. And you can go back home, back to God. It is sufficient. Not that we need to learn Sanskrit, we need to learn all the scriptures or anything. It's good to study the scriptures. There's nothing wrong with it. And scriptures means, I would just stick to Prabhupada's books. That's it. So in 1969, we didn't even have our own Bhagavad Gita. ISKCON didn't have its own Bhagavad Gita. And still Prabhupada said, just worship, just follow what I have given you. That's enough. So all we have to do is just have full faith in Prabhupada, do our chanting properly, service, worship the deities, and be sincere in whatever we are doing. That's all it is required. Chapter 31, A Threat Against ISKCON, Boston, December 21st, 1969. More than 100 of Prabhupada's disciples and followers are in the lobby of the international terminal of Boston's Logan Airport. Kirtanand Swami has come from New Vrindavan with a truckload of devotees. The devotees from New York are here with large banner. New York ISKCON welcomes Srila Prabhupada. Most of the devotees wear heavy coats over their dhotis and saris and are chanting Hare Krishna. Some play drums and cymbals. A few babies and children are present. Waiting passengers can only watch, startled. Prabhupada's plane is late, and the devotees continue chanting, often leaping into the air with outstretched arms. They haven't seen Prabhupada in a long time, and they are waiting, expecting to see him at any moment. Oblivious of the properties of being in public, the devotees chant emotionally, building almost to uncontrolled ecstasy. The state police step in to tell the biggest devotee, Brahmananda, cool it. The chanting falls away to a murmur of japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. The plane from London arrives. The devotees are unable to see the passengers entering in the glassed-in immigration and customs area because the bottom 6 feet of the glass wall is painted black. Straining to see over the top, the devotees press forward, chanting feverishly, some almost hysterical. Suddenly they see Prabhupada's raised hands with bead bag on the other side of the wall. They can see only his raised hand with the bead and the bead bag. They go wild. Fearlessly with drums and kartals, the kirtan explodes again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram. Advaita is tearfully smashing the kartals together and chanting. Brahmananda, jumping up and down, trying to glimpse into the customs room, is crying uncontrollably and yelling, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, free of customs, suddenly appears before them. Kirtananda Swami, reserved until now, leaps around airport chairs and runs to him. Everyone is pushing and running, trying to be where Prabhupada is. Prabhupada's saffron robes are wrinkled from the long flight and he wears a knit sweater. He holds his white plastic attaché case in his left hand and again raises his right arm. With forefinger and thumb extended from the bead bag, he smiles wonderfully, beaming to his children. Devotees cheer and cry, all glories to Prabhupada. As he walks toward a saffron-covered sofa in the airport lounge, the devotees move with him in an ecstatic way. Pressing in close, he sits down. Parmananda from New Vrindavan comes forward with his infant son, the first boy born in ISKCON, and holds him forward to Prabhupada for blessing. Prabhupada is smiling and the devotees are completely, unabashedly blissful. Where is Haigriv? Prabhupada asks. The question is repeated by the devotees, and big Haigriv lurches through the crowd, grumbling and falling flat at Prabhupada's feet in obeisances. One by one, the leaders of the various ISKCON centers come forward and place garland after garland around Prabhupada. Prabhupada looks beyond the wall of devotees at the newsmen and the cameras and at the baffled, curious, and disdainful onlookers. A bystander says, I think he must be some kind of politician. So Prabhupada begins speaking. The spiritual master is to be worshipped as God. But if he is thinking that he is God, then he is useless. My request is, please don't take Krishna consciousness as a sectarian religion. Prabhupada explains that Krishna consciousness is a great science, culminating in pure love of God. These boys and girls had never heard of Krishna before. Prabhupada continues, but now they have taken it up so naturally because it is natural. Prabhupada says that he is an old man, yet he is sure that even if he passes away, his students will continue the Krishna consciousness movement. The potency of this movement is such that it can awaken awareness of God within everyone's heart. After the lecture, Prabhupada stands and is escorted outside, where a limousine waits to drive him off through the newly fallen snow. Riding joyfully in the car with Prabhupada were Kirtananda Swami, Brahmananda, Satsvarup, and Purushottam. A professional chauffeur drove. Prabhupada talked of London. It was an old aristocratic city, he said, and the temple was in a very influential area near the British Museum. The location is what it is called downtown. They passed a large billboard advertising a restaurant and a lounge, Continental. On seeing the billboard, Prabhupada said, Chintamani, what is that? Oh no, Continent. First he thought it was written Chintamani. The devotees looked at one another. Chintamani? Prabhupada had thought that the sign had read Chintamani, meaning the spiritual gems that make up the transcendental land of Krishna Loka. But Prabhupada himself was Chintamani, pure and innocent, coming to the cold, dirty city of Boston, yet always thinking of Krishna wherever he was. How fortunate to be with him. Sasarup glanced at the professional chauffeur. Drive carefully, he said. Prabhupada spoke softly from the back seat, while the devotees in front peered back, barely able to see him in the darkness and completely awed by his friendly yet inconceivable presence. The other day he said, I told George Harrison that if he thought his money belonged to him, that was Maya. At the summer tunnel, the limousine pulled up at an automatic toll booth. The driver threw a coin into the chute and the red light turned green. Prabhupada asked if sometimes people drove through without paying, and Brahmananda replied that an alarm would go off. They moved ahead into the summer tunnel, usually an eerie, nerve-wracking place, but not when riding with Prabhupada. I told George to give his money to Krishna, Prabhupada said. Not that he had to give it to Krishna by giving it to me necessarily, but that somehow or other he must spend all of his money for Krishna. But you're the only way to Krishna, Brahmananda said. Prabhupada laughed lightly. Yes, he admitted, at least in the West. This was a great privilege of being able to ride with Prabhupada, to hear him say little things, so serious things, and to see his fathomless expression or his kind smiling. It was a rare opportunity. I am representing unadulterated teachings, Prabhupada continued. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, surrender to me. And I say surrender to Krishna. It's very simple. So many Swamis come and present themselves as Krishna, and it's all spoiled. But I say surrender to Krishna. I do not say anything new or adulterated. Krishna says surrender to me, and I say surrender to Krishna. Prabhupada asked Brahmananda if 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead magazine were being printed. Brahmananda answered that they were. Good, Prabhupada replied. Turning his attention to Satsvarup, Prabhupada asked how the composing machine was working, and Satsvarup said that hundreds of pages were being composed each month. So this Back to Godhead magazine gets printed, and it gets printed once every 3 months. So 50,000 copies at that time, every 3 months, and printed and sold on the streets by devotees. And so many people have read these Back to Godhead magazines since 1968 or 69. Prabhupada asked Kirtanand Swami about New Vrindavan. New Vrindavan would improve, Prabhupada said. The only thing wrong was that it got blocked up in the winter. Each devotee in the car felt completely satisfied by his brief exchange with Prabhupada, and they rode with him intoxicated in spiritual bliss. Most of the devotees had raced ahead to the temple on Beacon Street and were waiting excitedly. The limousine pulled up, and again the devotees were unrestrained in their adoration of their spiritual master. Regally, Prabhupada walked up the walkway onto the porch steps, through the front door and into the vestibule, where he gazed around at the purple walls and the pink and green doorways. Surrounded by cheers and loving looks, he smiled. The second-floor parlor, now the temple room, was filled with more than 150 disciples and guests, and they could see Prabhupada's form rise into view as he came up the stairs. He still carried his white attache case in his left hand and his bead bag in his right. And although he had just come out of the winter's night, he wore no coat, only cotton robes and a sweater. He appeared radiant. Prabhupada approached the altar. He seemed to notice everything. The small Radha Krishna deities enthroned beneath a red velvet canopy, the large deities of Jagannath, Subhadra and Balram on a raised shelf above the picture of Lord Chaitanya and his Sankirtan party. Even the brass Aarti paraphernalia, brightly shining on a small table near the altar. Turning to his secretary and traveling companion, Purushottam, he asked, what do you think, Purushottam? Isn't this very nice? Crossing the room, Prabhupada sat on the red velvet Vyasasana. He spoke and the audience was attentive. After praising the London Centre, the deity worship Devata expertly made puris for Radha and Krishna. He turned towards the altar and said, if you clean the deity's utensils, your heart will become cleansed. So this is a wonderful instruction for all of us. Any service obviously is great, but doing or cleaning deities' dishes, utensils, it cleanses the heart. And cleaning the temple of the deity, cleaning the altar, it cleanses the heart. By polishing the deity's paraphernalia, he said, the devotees were cleaning the spiritual master's heart also. As he spoke, focusing simply and purely on devotion to the deity, the devotees suddenly realized the importance of this aspect of the Krishna consciousness. Who has made these cloths? Prabhupada asked, glancing at Radha and Krishna little flounced dresses. Sharadiya, a few devotees called out. Prabhupada smiled. Thank you very much. Then he threw back his head and laughed. Is Sharadiya still fighting with her husband? The devotees and guests laughed, while Sharadiya covered her face with her hands. Don't fight with your husband, Prabhupada said. He's a good boy. Anybody that comes to Krishna consciousness is good. He then asked to see the rest of the house. 100 devotees are straining to see and hear Prabhupada's responses, followed him as he went downstairs. Although the crowd surrounded him, he remained relaxed and unhurried. He entered the press room, a long hall directly beneath the temple room. A large old offset press, a paper cutter, a folder, and flats of paper stock filled the room, which smelled like a print shop. Advaita, the press manager, bowed down in his green khakis before Prabhupada. He rose up smiling, and Prabhupada stepped forward and embraced him, putting his arm around Advaita's head. Very good, he said, because they were printing the books, printing Back to Godhead magazine. So everything was being done in-house. Standing before the printing press, Prabhupada folded his palms together and offered a prayer to his spiritual master. Jayam Vishnupad Paramhans Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai. Advaita asked Prabhupada to give the press a transcendental name. ISKCON Press, Prabhupada said matter-of-factly, as if it had already been named. Keep all the machines very clean, Prabhupada said, and they will last a long time. This is the heart of ISKCON. You are the heart of ISKCON, Prabhupada, the devotee said. And this is my heart, said Prabhupada. Leaving the main press room, Prabhupada toured the other press facilities, squeezing in, ducking under, standing on tiptoe. The crowd of devotees followed him step by step. He peeked into a little cubby hole where a devotee was composing type. The typesetters, he said, should proceed very slowly at first, and in that way, they would become expert. Turning to Advaita, he said, everyone in India who speaks Hindi has a Gita Press publication. So everyone who speaks English should have an ISKCON Press publication. So that is Prabhupada's desire. So anyway, I guess we can stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Jai
Krishna.
Shri Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila
Thank you,
Prabhupada.
Babaji.